As we saw with subject headings, classification can be a bit more complicated for music, especially for scores and sound recordings. Because they're usually not about anything, the kind of subject classification used by Dewey and Library of Congress doesn't quite work with scores and recordings. Scores and recordings may also combine different works that would be classified differently. In both Dewey and Library of Congress systems, music is organized by ensemble type or instrument and genre, not by subject or composer. I'll include a short tutorial video after this one that's made for a general audience that describes how to browse Library of Congress score collections and understand their call numbers. It's important to note that classification of scores in both Dewey and Library of Congress foregrounds the medium of performance, the ensemble type and instrumentation. While this is an aspect of the piece that usually isn't typically well represented in the catalog records. Hopefully that's changing with the implementation of the new medium of performance faceted terms, but it's a slow process. For performers, the instrumentation is often the most important feature, since they're usually looking for things they can play. And of course, a catalog summary of a piano sonata can't really tell you anything about the contents, how difficult it is, or what style it's in, and so on. So historically, score collections have been thought of as largely browsing collections, where patrons are likely to interact with the materials by going to the area for their instrument or ensemble and looking through to find what appeals to them, rather than being able to find much useful information via the catalog, which is mostly used for finding known items, where the patron knows exactly what they want. The new controlled vocabulary projects are part of an effort to fix this, but it's unlikely to completely change because of the difficulties of summarizing anything about the content of a musical work. While libraries are pretty standardized in using Library of Congress or Dewey Decimal for classifying books and scores in nearly all cases, sound recordings are complicated, and you'll see different classifications used in many cases. For example, UWM has classified sound recordings historically by accession number or by label at different times in the history of the collection. This is relatively easy to do and works fine in situations like we've had where recordings are behind a desk and have to be retrieved by staff, but it's not at all suited to browsing. Library of Congress and Dewey Decimal are not intended for recordings, but for scores and books. So for example, American popular vocal music has one number for all its forms. This works okay for scores where libraries don't typically have a lot of pop music represented, but it's not great for CDs. Some libraries instead use the kind of general categories you might find in a music shop, with the flexibility to integrate local preferences or emphases. One very common approach in both academic and public libraries is to use the alphanumeric system for classification of recordings, or ANSWER. This looks a bit like the Library of Congress letter number code, but the whole alphabet is devoted to music, so there's space to further break down categories and make recordings more intuitively browsable.